"Get away from my store," the shop owner shouted at the homeless man. But when fire erupted 3 minutes later, that same worthless bum would do something that revealed why enemy soldiers once whispered his name in fear. The morning sun cast long shadows across Pine Street in the small town of Millbrook, Vermont. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where secrets were hard to keep, and where the American flag flew proudly from every other porch. Yet somehow, in this tight-knit community of 3,000 souls, there existed a man whom nobody truly saw. His name was Daniel Morrison, though few people knew it. Most simply called him the homeless guy or that bum on 5th. He was a fixture on the corner near Patterson's general store, as permanent and unremarkable as the fire hydrant beside him. His appearance matched the role society had assigned him perfectly: a weathered face lined with deep creases, a scraggly grey beard that hadn't seen scissors in years, and clothes that bore the permanent stains of street living. His hands, wrapped in fingerless gloves even during summer, were calloused and scarred in ways that might have told stories to anyone who cared to look closely enough. But nobody looked closely at Daniel Morrison. He had claimed that corner 6 years ago, appearing in Millbrook like a ghost materializing from nowhere. The police had checked on him initially, as they did with all newcomers who didn't fit the town's carefully maintained image. They'd found no warrants, no criminal record, nothing but a veteran's ID card that was so worn the photograph was barely visible. He'd answered their questions with polite monosyllables, accepted their offer of shelter information with a quiet nod, and then returned to his corner. That was where he stayed. Daniel's daily routine had the precision of a military operation, though no one noticed the pattern. He woke at exactly 5:30 each morning, regardless of season or weather. His sleeping spot was a carefully selected alcove behind the old Morrison building, no relation to his surname, just one of life's small ironies. The location provided shelter from wind and rain while offering 2 escape routes and a clear line of sight to the street. Old habits died hard. By 6 o'clock, he would fold his sleeping bag, a military issue item from decades past, patched and repatched but still functional, and secure his few possessions in the battered backpack that served as his mobile home. Everything he owned fit in that bag: a change of clothes, a small first aid kit, a water bottle, 3 protein bars, and buried at the bottom, wrapped in a plastic bag within a plastic bag within a cloth, something he hadn't looked at in for years. He couldn't bear to look at it. He didn't deserve to look at it. Daniel would spend the morning hours walking a precise circuit through Millbrook. To the casual observer, he was simply wandering, perhaps looking for handouts or returnable bottles. In reality, he was conducting reconnaissance. He noted which businesses opened early, which residents left for work at which times, which houses had dogs, which alleys offered cover, which vehicles were parked where. He catalogued everything, analyzed everything, remembered everything. The training never left. The guilt never left either. By 8 o'clock, he would take his position on the corner near Patterson's general store. The location wasn't random. From that single point, Daniel had clear sight lines down 3 streets. He could see the elementary school 2 blocks north, the fire station 3 blocks east, and the medical clinic 1 block south. If something happened, and his instincts constantly screamed that something would happen, he would know immediately. Thomas Patterson, owner of Patterson's general store, had tolerated Daniel's presence for exactly 2 weeks before the complaint started. Customers didn't like seeing a homeless man when they came to buy their morning coffee and newspapers. It was unsettling. It was uncomfortable. It was bad for business. "You need to move along," Patterson had said that first time, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd never been contradicted in his own establishment. "You're scaring away customers." Daniel had looked up at him with those strange, distant eyes that seemed to be looking at something far beyond the present moment, and simply nodded. He'd moved 50 feet down the street, still visible from the store, still maintaining his sight lines, but technically no longer in front of the establishment. It became a pattern. Every few weeks, Patterson would emerge from his store, red-faced and irritated, and order Daniel to leave. Daniel would comply, moving just far enough to technically satisfy the demand while maintaining his self-assigned post. It was a game neither man acknowledged they were playing. The residents of Millbrook had their own relationships with the homeless. Veteran, though relationship was perhaps too strong a word. To them, Daniel Morrison was scenery, something you stepped around like a puddle or a crack in the sidewalk. Margaret Chen, who taught 3rd grade at Millbrook Elementary, passed Daniel every morning on her way to school. She would clutch her purse a little tighter and look straight ahead, her pace quickening slightly. In her mind, she was a compassionate person. She voted for funding social services and often said homelessness was a tragedy, but actual homeless people made her uncomfortable. They were unpredictable, possibly dangerous, certainly not something she wanted to engage with before her morning coffee kicked in. Robert Jensen, the police chief, had a different relationship with Daniel. Jensen was a good cop in the way small-town cops often are. He knew everyone, remembered everyone's business, and took genuine pride in keeping Millbrook safe. He'd run Daniel's information through every database available 6 years ago and found nothing alarming. The veteran's ID checked out. No wants, no warrants, no red flags. But something about Daniel bothered Jensen in a way he couldn't articulate. It wasn't what the homeless man did. Daniel never caused trouble, never begged aggressively, never bothered anyone beyond his mere presence. It was what he didn't do. He didn't shuffle. He didn't stumble. When he walked, despite the worn-out boots and the dirty clothes, there was a precision to his movement that Jensen's cop instincts found oddly disturbing. And his eyes, when you caught them, were too alert, too aware, constantly scanning, assessing, calculating. Jensen had tried engaging Daniel in conversation exactly 3 times over the years. Each time, the homeless man had been polite, respectful even, answering questions with a soft yes sir or no sir that carried the unmistakable cadence of military discipline. But he never volunteered information, never explained his circumstances, never asked for help. You know, there are programs, Jensen had said during their last conversation 2 years ago. Veteran services. You could get housing, healthcare, job training. Daniel had looked at him for a long moment, those distant eyes seeming to focus and unfocus like a camera lens. I appreciate that, sir. I'm fine where I am. You're living on the street. Yes, sir, I am. Why? The silence had stretched for nearly a minute. Finally, Daniel had spoken, his voice so quiet Jensen had to lean into. Here, because I don't deserve anything better, sir. Before Jensen could respond, Daniel had gathered his things and moved to another corner. They hadn't spoken since. The children of Millbrook treated Daniel with the brutal honesty that only children possess. To them, he was the scary man or the soldier guy. Some of the older kids had noticed the faded military patches on his backpack. They would dare each other to walk past him, squealing and running away if he so much as glanced in their direction. Their parents would pull them closer, shooting disapproving looks at Daniel as if his mere existence was an assault on their children's innocence. Daniel noticed all of this. He noticed everything. But he never reacted, never responded, never gave any indication that the treatment bothered him. He had survived things that would have broken most people's minds. He had done things that had broken his own. The scorn of a small town was nothing compared to the memories that haunted him every night, because Daniel Morrison carried ghosts, 47 of them to be precise, and they were far more present to him than any living resident of Millbrook could ever be. On this particular morning, October 17th, a Tuesday that would etch itself into Millbrook's collective memory, Daniel had completed his usual circuit and taken his position on the corner at exactly 8 o'clock. The temperature was 53 degrees with clear skies, wind from the northeast at 6 miles per hour. Visibility unlimited. His mind catalogued these details automatically, a weather report from a war that had ended decades ago but still raged in his head. Thomas Patterson emerged from his store at 8:17, right on schedule. Daniel had been expecting this. Patterson's complaints followed a predictable pattern every 3 weeks, usually on a Tuesday or Wednesday, usually between 8:15 and 8:30. Human beings were creatures of habit, and Daniel had made a career of exploiting those habits. Patterson's voice carried the familiar note of righteous irritation. I've told you 100 times. You can't loiter here. It's bad for business. Daniel began gathering his things without a word. His movements were methodical. First the coffee cup he used for occasional donations, then the flattened cardboard he sat on, finally his backpack. Everything had its place. Everything had its order. I don't understand why you keep coming back here, Patterson continued, his voice rising. Small crowds made him brave. Several customers had emerged from the store behind him, and a few pedestrians had stopped to watch the confrontation. There are shelters. There are programs. But no, you'd rather sit here looking pathetic and driving away my customers. Daniel stood, shouldering his backpack. The motion revealed something that Patterson, in his anger, didn't notice, but that Police Chief Jensen, watching from across the street, caught immediately. The Smoothness of the movement, the balanced way Daniel positioned his weight, the automatic scan of his surroundings before he took a step. These weren't the actions of a broken-down homeless drunk. These were the actions of someone with training. Advanced training. "Get away from my store," Patterson shouted, making a dismissive gesture with his hand. Daniel nodded once and turned to leave. He'd gone exactly 4 steps when his body went rigid. The smell hit him first. His olfactory memory, trained through countless missions and too many close calls, identified it instantly. Smoke. Not wood smoke from a fireplace. Not cigarette smoke. Something chemical. Something burning that shouldn't be burning. Electrical fire. His head snapped toward the source, an apartment building half a block down. The structure was old, built in the 1920s, 3 stories of aging brick and timber that would burn like kindling once the fire really got going. Daniel's mind, switching into a mode it hadn't accessed in years, began calculating automatically. 3 stories, 12 units, 4 per floor. Tuesday morning, 8:20 a.m. Children would be at school, but there could be preschoolers, adults who worked night shifts, elderly residents. The first floor showed no visible smoke yet, which meant the fire was probably in the walls or starting on an upper floor. Time to full involvement, maybe 15 minutes, maybe less if the structure was as dry as it looked. Time to first casualties. Already counting down. Daniel's hands clenched and unclenched. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to act, to do what he'd been trained to do. But another voice, the voice that had kept him on that corner for 6 years, whispered its familiar poison. "You don't get to be a hero anymore. You used up that right. You lost it with the 47 men you led to their deaths." Smoke began curling from a second-story window. Someone inside screamed. And just like that, 6 years of self-imposed penance evaporated. Daniel Morrison, the invisible homeless man, disappeared. In his place stood someone else entirely. Captain Daniel Morrison, United States Army Rangers. Call sign, Reaper. He dropped his backpack and ran. The transformation that came over Daniel Morrison in those first seconds was something that no one in Millbrook could have predicted or understood. His shuffling homeless gait disappeared, replaced by the ground-eating run of someone who'd spent years carrying 80 pounds of gear over hostile terrain. His shoulders squared. His head came up. His eyes, usually distant and unfocused, became sharp and predatory. He covered the half-block to the apartment building in less than 15 seconds. Behind him, he could hear Patterson still yelling something, could hear other voices rising in confusion and alarm, but they were background noise, unimportant data filtered out by a mind that had shifted into combat mode. The apartment building's front door was unlocked. Small town America's blessing and curse. Daniel hit it at full speed, his shoulder taking the impact as he burst into the ground floor hallway. The smell of smoke was stronger here, and he could hear something else now, the particular crackling sound of wood starting to give way to flame. The fire was in the walls, spreading fast through the old building's skeleton. Fire, Daniel's voice, unused to shouting after years of silence, came out as a rasp. He tried again, louder. Fire! Everyone out, now! A door to his left opened. An elderly man peered out, confusion on his weathered face. "What's buildings on fire? Get out. Use the front door. Go now." Something in Daniel's tone, in his bearing, in the absolute authority of his command, cut through the old man's confusion. He nodded once and moved, shouting to someone inside his apartment. A woman emerged, his wife, probably, and together they hurried toward the exit. Daniel was already moving to the next door, pounding on it with his fist. Fire! Evacuate! Everyone out! The same at the next door and the next. The ground floor had 4 apartments. 2 were empty, people at work. The elderly couple from the first apartment. The 4th door opened to reveal a young woman with a crying infant. Fire! Her voice was high with fear. But where? Don't matter where. Out. Now. Front door. Go. She went, clutching her baby and running for the exit. Smoke was pouring into the hallway now, thick and black, crawling along the ceiling. Daniel could feel the temperature rising. The fire was above him, probably on the 2nd floor, eating through the old structure. Modern buildings were built with fire breaks, with safety systems, with sprinklers. This building was built when people still thought fire was something you could outrun. The stairs were to his left. Daniel took them 3 at a time, his body remembering the rhythm. The Special Forces fitness test required climbing a rope, scaling walls, moving fast with Full gear. 20 years ago, he'd done it with ease. Now, at 63, his knees protested and his lungs burned, but the muscle memory remained. Second floor hallway. Smoke everywhere now, reducing visibility to a few feet. Daniel dropped to a crouch. Instinctively, smoke rises, cooler air stays low. His eyes watered, but he kept them open, scanning. The fire was coming from the end unit, apartment 2D. Orange light flickered under the door and flames were beginning to eat through the old wood. "Anyone here?" Daniel shouted. "Fire! Everyone out!" He went door to door again. Two are empty. 2B, a young man emerged, eyes wide with panic, took one look at the smoke and ran for the stairs. "Good." 2C, Daniel pounded on the door. No answer. He tried the knob. Locked. He stepped back and kicked, just below the lock. The old door splintered. One more kick and it burst open. Empty apartment. Not empty as in vacant, but empty as in no one home. He could see personal effects, furniture, a breakfast plate, on the kitchen table. Someone lived here, but they weren't here now. Lucky them. That left 2D. The fire unit. Flames were fully visible now, crawling up the walls, spreading across the ceiling. The heat was intense, painful even from 15 feet away. Nobody could be alive in there. Nobody could have survived this long. Daniel turned toward the stairs. The smart move, the survival move, was to get out now. Check the third floor from the exterior if flames hadn't reached it yet. Fire department could handle it. They'd be here soon. Someone must have called 911 by now. His job was done. Then he heard it. A child's cry. Faint, muffled by walls and smoke and flame, but unmistakable. Coming from 2D. Coming from the inferno. Daniel's rational mind screamed at him. The door was engulfed. The temperature inside had to be 800, maybe 1,000 degrees. The structure was compromised. The ceiling could collapse any second. Going in there was suicide. But that cry, that sound of a child. In terror, he'd heard that sound before, in a different place, under a different sky. He'd heard it and he'd made a choice that had haunted him ever since. He'd chosen mission over men. He'd chosen objective over lives. And 47 soldiers had died because of it. Not again. Never again. Daniel pulled off his jacket and wrapped it around his right arm. Not much protection, but better than nothing. He took 3 deep breaths, the last one he held, and charged the burning door. His shoulder hit it full force. The weakened wood exploded inward. Heat blasted him like a physical force, singeing his eyebrows and beard. He couldn't see anything, just orange and black, flame and smoke. The wrapped jacket protected his arm as he swept it through the air, trying to map the space through touch and memory. Standard apartment layout. Kitchen immediate right. Living room ahead. Bedrooms to the left. The cry had come from the left. Daniel moved forward, bent almost double, his free hand trailing. Along the wall. Fire was everywhere now, on the walls, across the ceiling, eating the furniture. His lungs screamed for air, but he kept his breath held. One inhale of superheated air would cook his lungs from the inside. A crash behind him, part of the ceiling collapsing. No time. Move faster. He reached a doorway. Bedroom. Smoke so thick he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. He dropped to his hands and knees where the air might be marginally better. His searching hand hit something. Soft. Fabric. A bed. The child cried again, directly in front of him. Daniel's hand found small shoulders. A boy, maybe 4 years old, huddled under the bed frame where some instinct had told him to hide. Smart kid. The air was better here, and the bed frame might provide momentary protection if the ceiling came down. But they couldn't stay. They had seconds at most. Daniel grabbed the child and pulled him close, wrapping his arms around the small body. The boy fought him natural fear response. Stranger danger even in the face of death. Daniel held him tighter, turned his own body to shield the child, and moved back toward where the door should be. His lungs were burning now. His vision was sparking at the edges. The heat was unbearable. His back felt like it was on fire, probably was on fire. He could smell burning hair, burning cloth. Just a few more feet. Just a few more steps. Something in the ceiling gave way with a tortured groan. Daniel threw himself forward as a section of burning timber crashed down where he'd been standing milliseconds before. He hit the hallway floor hard, rolled, came up running with the child still clutched to his chest. The stairs. Down. His legs felt like rubber, but he forced them to move. Second floor. First floor. Ground floor. Front door ahead, blessed daylight beyond it. Daniel burst out of the building and staggered 20 feet before his legs finally gave out. He went to his knees on the sidewalk, still holding the child, and finally took a breath. The air tasted like heaven and agony all at once, scorching his smoke-damaged throat. The child was coughing, crying, but alive. Daniel's hands automatically checked him for injuries training from a lifetime ago reasserting itself. No burns he could see. Smoke inhalation, definitely. Traumatized, absolutely. But alive. "I've got you," Daniel rasped. "You're safe. I've got you." A woman's scream cut through the chaos. "Tyler!" A young mother broke through the gathering crowd and ran toward them. "Oh God, Tyler!" She reached them and Daniel released the child into her arms. She clutched her son, sobbing, then looked at Daniel with an expression that was pure shock. You went in there. You saved him. Daniel couldn't answer. His throat felt like he'd swallowed broken glass. He became aware, vaguely, of many people staring at him. The crowd had grown. He could see Patterson, mouth hanging open. Could see Margaret Chen, the teacher who'd avoided him every morning, with tears running down her face. Could see Police Chief Jensen running toward them. "Sir," Jensen dropped to a knee beside Daniel. "Sir, are you okay? Don't move. Ambulance is coming." Daniel shook his head, tried to speak, failed, tried again. "Third floor," he managed to croak. "Need to check." "Third floor. The fire department is here," Jensen said. "They'll handle it. You need medical attention." But Daniel was already trying to stand. His body wasn't cooperating. His legs shook and his vision tunneled, but he got to his feet through sheer force of will. The third floor. He had to check the third floor. The mission wasn't complete. "Sir, you can't," Jensen started. A new sound cut him off. Not a scream this time. A shout, coming from the building's third floor window. A man stood there, visible through the smoke that was now billowing from multiple windows. He was holding something. Someone. A small figure in his arms. "Help," the man shouted. "My daughter, please." The fire department was there. Daniel could see them, could see the truck, the firefighters suiting up, but they were still preparing, still positioning the ladder truck, still going through the necessary procedures. Procedures took time that man didn't have. The fire was spreading faster now, feeding on the old building's dry bones. As Daniel watched, flames burst through a third floor window. The man stumbled back, coughing. Daniel looked at the firefighters, looked at their preparations, looked at the building, made a calculation based on decades of experience assessing impossible situations. The girl would be dead before they were ready. "No," Jensen said, reading Daniel's body language. "No, you can't. You're injured. You've already," but Daniel was moving. Not toward the front entrance that was fully engulfed now, impassable. Around the side of the building. There was always another way in. There had to be another way in. He found it a fire escape on the building's east side, old and rusted but still intact. The ladder was up, but a dumpster sat below it. Daniel climbed onto the dumpster, jumped, caught the lowest rung of the ladder. His burned hands screamed in protest. He ignored them. Up. One rung. Another. His body was failing, but his mind wouldn't let it stop. He'd failed his men once. He'd lived with that failure for 20 years. He would not fail this child. Second floor landing. The fire escape was hot to the touch now, metal heated. By the inferno inside. Third floor. The man was there, at the window, coughing. The little girl in his arms wasn't moving. Here, Daniel's voice was barely audible over the roar of the flames. "Give her to me." The man's eyes widened. He'd probably expected a firefighter in full gear, not a burned and blooded homeless man. But desperation doesn't allow for choice. He lifted his daughter toward the window. Daniel reached through, got his arms around the small body. She was maybe 6 years old, unconscious from smoke inhalation. He pulled her through the window frame, cradled her against his chest with one arm, and began the descent. One-handed ladder climbing. He'd done it before, in training, with full gear and a rifle. But he'd been young then, uninjured, not suffering from smoke inhalation and God knows what degree burns. One rung down. His hand slipped. He caught himself, held the child tighter. Another rung. His vision was graying at the edges. Another rung. The world was tilting. He didn't remember the last 10 feet, didn't remember reaching the ground. His next clear memory was lying on his back on the sidewalk with someone, a paramedic, putting an oxygen mask over his face. "Sir, stay still. You're in shock." You have burns. You need. Daniel pushed the mask aside. The girl, he managed. Is she breathing? You got her out in time. Sir, please, you need to. But Daniel's eyes were already closing. The adrenaline that had kept him moving, kept him functioning, was gone. In its place came pain, more pain than he'd felt since that day 20 years ago when his world had ended in fire and blood and failure. He welcomed it. Pain meant he was alive. Pain meant the children were alive. Pain meant that maybe, just maybe, he'd begun to repay a debt that could never truly be repaid. His last thought before unconsciousness took him was of his men, his 47 ghosts. For the first time in 6 years, when he pictured their faces, they weren't looking at him with accusation. They were saluting. Daniel woke to white. White ceiling, white walls, white sheets, the antiseptic smell of a hospital. His body was a symphony of pain. His back burned. His hands throbbed. His lungs felt like they'd been scrubbed with steel wool. But he was alive. Hey, a voice to his left. Female. Familiar. Welcome back. Daniel turned his head. The motion sent fresh pain lancing through his neck and saw a nurse standing beside his bed. Young, maybe 30, with kind eyes that looked tired. Her name tag read Jennifer Santos. The children, Daniel croaked. His throat felt like raw meat. Both fine, Jennifer said immediately. She'd obviously been expecting the question. Tyler Mitchell, the 4-year-old, smoke inhalation and minor burns. Released yesterday. Emma Park, the 6-year-old, was more serious, but she's stable. Her father sends his thanks. Everyone wants to thank you, actually. How long? 2 days. You've been in and out, mostly out. 2nd-degree burns on your back and hands. Smoke inhalation. Mild hypothermia. You were in shock. Malnutrition. She paused. Mr. Morrison, when was the last time you ate a real meal? Daniel didn't answer. Couldn't answer. The truth that he ate only enough to survive, that he'd been punishing himself with deprivation for 6 years, wasn't something he could explain. The doctor will want to talk to you, Jennifer continued, and the police, and about 50 reporters. You're kind of famous now. Famous. The word made Daniel's stomach clench. Famous meant attention. Attention meant questions. Questions meant his past would come out. And his past was something he'd spent 6 years trying to bury. I need to leave, Daniel said, trying to sit up. His body immediately vetoed that decision with a wave of pain that made his vision wide out. You need to stay in bed, Jennifer said firmly, gently pushing him back down. You're not going anywhere for at least another week. Doctor's orders. A week. A week of people asking questions, digging into his history, finding out who he really was, what he'd done, what he'd failed to do. A knock at the door interrupted his spiraling thoughts. Police Chief Jensen entered, followed by a younger officer Daniel didn't recognize. Jensen held a manila folder. Mr. Morrison, Jensen said. His tone was different than it had been on the street, not dismissive or suspicious, but careful, respectful. How are you feeling? Been better. Jensen pulled up a chair and sat. The younger officer remained by the door. I need to ask you some questions. About the fire. About what you did. Is that okay? Daniel nodded slightly. You saved 3 people. Tyler Mitchell, age 4. Emma Park, age 6. And Emma's father, David Park, managed to get out using the fire escape after you got Emma down. The fire marshal says the building was fully involved within minutes of your exit. If you hadn't acted when you did, all 3 would have died. Jensen paused. That was remarkable work. Mr. Morrison, professional work. There it was. The first probe. The first question that wasn't really a question. Just did what anyone would do, Daniel said. No, Jensen's voice was flat. What you did wasn't what anyone would do. The fire department captain, 20-year veteran, said he wouldn't have attempted what you did. Said it was tactically brilliant but suicidal. Said whoever taught you rescue operations knew what they were doing. Silence filled the room. Daniel could feel the weight of Jensen's gaze, could sense the questions building behind the police chief's careful expression. Mr. Morrison, Jensen said slowly, I ran your information 6 years ago when you first arrived. I found a veteran's ID and not much else. But after the fire, after what you did, I ran it again, deeper this time. Made some calls to people I know who know people. Daniel's hands clenched despite the pain. This was it. This was the moment his 6 years of anonymity ended. Jensen opened the manila folder. Captain Daniel Morrison, United States Army Rangers, enlisted 1979, commissioned 1982. Multiple deployments: Grenada, Panama, Gulf War, Somalia. Citations for valor including 2 Silver Stars and a Bronze Star with V device. Promoted to Captain 1991. Assigned to Special Operations 1993. Each word was a hammer blow. Each detail a piece of the wall Daniel had built around himself being torn down. And then, Jensen continued, his voice softer now, March 2004. Operation Silent. Shepherd. Classified mission, but the official record shows Captain Daniel Morrison led a special operations team into hostile territory. The mission was a success. The target was eliminated, but 47 American soldiers died in the operation. There it was, the center of Daniel's personal hell, laid out in sterile official language that didn't capture the screams, the blood, the smell of burning flesh, the faces of men who trusted him looking up from the ground as life left their eyes. The Army cleared you, Jensen said. The after-action review concluded you followed orders and made the best tactical decisions available given the circumstances. They offered you promotion, offered you a desk job at the Pentagon. You refused and took early retirement in 2005. Jensen closed the folder. You disappeared for 13 years. Then you showed up here, on the street, living like you were punishing yourself. Daniel's throat was too tight to speak. His eyes burned, but not from smoke this time. What happened? Jensen asked quietly. What really happened in 2004? The story came out in fragments, in broken pieces, like shrapnel being slowly extracted from a wound. Daniel talked and couldn't stop talking, the words pouring out after years of silence. The mission had been simple on paper. Intelligence had located a high-value target, a terrorist commander responsible for multiple attacks on American forces hiding in a remote compound in the Afghan mountains. Daniel's team was to infiltrate, confirm the target, and call in an airstrike. Quick, clean, low risk. But intelligence had been wrong. Not about the target he was there, but about the compound. It wasn't a simple hideout. It was a base heavily fortified with over 200 enemy fighters. Daniel's team of 12 had walked into a hornet's nest. They'd made it to the compound, confirmed the target. Daniel had called for extraction, but command had denied it. The target was too valuable, too rare an opportunity. They couldn't risk him escaping. Daniel was ordered to maintain position and wait for a larger strike force. The wait had lasted 3 days. 3 days of his team pinned down, surrounded, taking fire from all sides. 3 days of requesting permission to withdraw, to abort, to save his men. 3 days of being told to hold position because the bigger mission mattered more. On the 3rd day, the strike force had arrived. Marine Company, 180 strong. They'd assaulted the compound. The target was eliminated. The mission was a success. 67 Americans had died in the battle. 47 of them were from the Marine Company. 12 were Daniel's team. Only Daniel and 3 others had survived. I should have disobeyed orders, Daniel said, his voice breaking. I should have pulled my team out. Let the target escape. Those Marines, they were kids. 18, 19 years old. They died because I followed orders. Because I chose the mission over their lives. You followed orders, Jensen said quietly. You did your duty. The review board cleared you. The review board wasn't there. Daniel's voice rose, then cracked. They didn't see. They didn't hear. Those boys calling for their mothers as they died. They didn't have to write letters to 47 families explaining why their sons weren't coming home. They didn't have to live with the memory of choosing a mission objective over human lives. He was crying now, tears he'd held back for 20 years finally breaking free. I got medals. They gave me medals, pinned them on my chest and told me I was a hero. But I'm not a hero, Chief. I'm the man who killed 47 soldiers as surely as if I'd pulled the trigger myself. Jennifer the nurse had quietly left the room at some point. It was just Daniel, Jensen, and the weight of 2 decades of guilt. So I left, Daniel continued. Left the army. Left my pension. Left everything. Because I didn't deserve any of it. I didn't deserve a comfortable life while those 47 were in the ground. I thought if I punished myself enough, if I suffered enough, maybe the faces would stop haunting me. Maybe the dreams would stop. Did they? Jensen asked. No, they got worse. Jensen was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of its own. My brother was in Iraq. 2006. IED took his convoy. He was 23. He looked directly at Daniel, the officer who led his unit who survived when my brother Didn't he blamed himself too? Drank himself to death 2 years later. My mother went to his funeral. You know what she said to his widow? Daniel shook his head. She said, "Your husband was a good man who made impossible choices in impossible situations. My son knew the risks. He chose to serve. Don't let survivor's guilt kill you too." But the widow couldn't hear it. She couldn't forgive her husband for surviving. And so she lost him anyway, just slower. The parallel wasn't subtle. Daniel didn't respond. Captain Morrison, Jensen said formally, "What you did 20 years ago was follow orders in a combat situation where there were no good choices. What you did 2 days ago was save 3 lives at massive risk to your own. Both of those actions matter. Both of them count. The second doesn't erase the first." No, Jensen agreed. It doesn't. Nothing can. But maybe it's time to stop punishing yourself for being human, for surviving, for making an impossible choice in an impossible situation. A commotion outside interrupted them. Raised voices. A crowd. Jensen rose and went to the door, opened it slightly. Daniel could hear fragments of conversation, reporters, questions about the hero homeless veteran, requests for interviews. Jensen closed the door and turned back. It started. The media found out who you are, or rather, who you were. The stories everywhere: decorated war hero lives on streets, saves children from fire. You're about to become very famous. Captain, Daniel's chest tightened. I don't want fame. I want to be left alone. Too late for that. Jensen's expression was sympathetic but firm. You saved 2 children's lives in front of half the town. You can't put that genie back in the bottle. But here's something to think about: 47 families know their sons died in service. But Tyler Mitchell's family and Emma Park's family know their children lived because of you. Doesn't that count for something? Before Daniel could answer, the door burst open. A man pushed past the protesting young officer David Park, Emma's father, still bearing the signs of smoke exposure himself. "You," Park said, his voice choked with emotion. "You're the man who saved my daughter." Daniel tried to speak, couldn't find words. Park approached the bed, tears streaming down his face. "The doctors said she would have died in another minute. Brain damage from oxygen deprivation, if not death. But you got her out. You risked your life for a stranger's child." She's awake," Park continued. "She's asking about the angel who pulled her out of the fire. I told her it wasn't an angel. It was something better. It was a hero. I'm not a hero. You're my daughter's hero. You're my hero. And I don't care what you think you are or aren't. I know what you did for my family." Park pulled something from his pocket. It looked like money, a check. "I've started a fund to help you get back on your feet. There's already $20,000 in it and it's growing. People want to help. They want to thank you." "I don't want money." "Then don't take it for yourself," Park said. "Take it to help others. Take it to do something good. But please, please don't go back to the streets. Don't disappear. My daughter needs to know you're okay. She needs to know the man who saved her life values his own life too." The weight of those words settled over Daniel like a physical force. A 6-year-old girl, traumatized by fire, asking about him, needing to know he was okay, needing her hero to not throw away the life he'd risked to save hers. "I need time," Daniel finally said. "I need to think." "Take all the time you need," Park said. "But know this: you made a difference. You saved my little girl. Nothing in your past, whatever it is, can change that. You are a hero, whether you accept it or not." After Park left, after Jensen left, after the nurses finished their rounds and the room fell into the artificial quiet of a hospital, at night, Daniel lay in his bed staring at the ceiling. He thought about Emma Park, 6 years old, asking about her rescuer. He thought about Tyler Mitchell, 4 years old, alive because Daniel had made a choice. He thought about 47 Marines, 18 and 19 years old, dead because of choices made in chaos and fire and impossible circumstances. And he thought about something his commanding officer had told him once, decades ago: "Morrison, you can't save everyone. Best you can do is save who you can when you can and live with the rest." He'd spent 20 years trying to save no one, including himself. Maybe it was time to try something different. His backpack was in the corner of the room, brought in with his few possessions. Inside it, wrapped in plastic and cloth, was something he hadn't looked at in 6 years. Daniel pulled himself out of bed, ignoring his body's screaming protests, and retrieved the backpack. His burned hands fumbled with the wrappings until he finally pulled out what lay hidden at the bottom: a Medal of Honor. Awarded posthumously, or so he'd thought, to Captain Daniel Morrison for extraordinary heroism in Operation Silent Shepherd. The medal he'd been told his next of kin would receive since he'd died in the operation. The medal they'd given him anyway when it turned out he'd survived. The medal he'd carried like a millstone for 2 decades. He held it up to the dim light. The star gleamed despite years of neglect. On the ribbon, embossed letters, Valor. For the first time since receiving it, Daniel didn't feel like the medal was a lie. Didn't feel like he was wearing the honor of dead men. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could live with being both things at once. The man who'd made an impossible choice that cost 47 lives, and the man who'd made a different choice that saved 3. Both were true. Both were him. And maybe, just maybe, that was okay. Daniel clutched the medal to his chest and, for the first time in 6 years, allowed himself to cry without shame, to mourn without drowning in guilt, to remember his fallen soldiers not as accusations but as men who'd known the risks and chosen to serve anyway. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the 47 ghosts that would never fully leave him. "I'm so sorry, but I'm going to try to live now. I'm going to try to make your sacrifice mean something. I hope that's okay." In the silence of the hospital room, he could almost imagine them answering, "It's okay, Captain. We release you. You're dismissed." And for the first time in 20 years, Captain Daniel Morrison felt like maybe, just maybe, he could forgive himself enough to keep living. The Millbrook Community Center buzzed with activity on a bright April morning. Children laughed in the playground outside, while inside, veterans gathered for the weekly support group meeting. The space was warm and welcoming, funded by donations from across the state. Donations that had poured in after a certain story had captured the nation's attention. Daniel Morrison stood at the front of the room, facing 30 veterans of various ages and conflicts. Some were young, recently returned from Afghanistan or Iraq. Others were older, Vietnam-era soldiers carrying their own ghosts. All of them looked at Daniel with a mixture of respect and recognition, the look of people who'd found someone who truly understood. "My name is Daniel," he began, as he did every week. "I'm a veteran of multiple conflicts. I carry guilt for choices I made in combat. And for 20 years, I let that guilt destroy me." He paused, looking at the faces before him, saw himself reflected in every haunted eye. "But I learned something 6 months ago when I saved 2 children from a fire. I learned that we don't get to choose which moments define us. I thought my defining moment was the day 47 soldiers died under my command. Turns out I was wrong. My defining moment was choosing to act when action was needed, despite believing I had no right to be a hero anymore." A young veteran in the front row Afghan war, Daniel knew, with 2 missing fingers and survivor's guilt over a convoy attack, leaned forward, listening intently. "Here's what I want you all to know," Daniel continued. "Your worst day doesn't have to be your last day. Your biggest failure doesn't have to be your final act. You made choices in impossible situations. You survived when others didn't. That's not a crime. That's not something to punish yourself for. That's something to honor by living, by continuing to serve in whatever way you can, by refusing to let your ghosts turn you into one." After the meeting, as veterans mingled and shared coffee donated by Patterson's General Store, whose owner had become one of Daniel's biggest supporters, Margaret Chen approached. The teacher who'd once avoided eye contact now volunteered at the center twice a week. "Captain Morrison," she said, "I wanted you to know Tyler Mitchell is doing great. He draws pictures of firefighters now. Says he wants to be a hero like the man who saved him." Daniel smiled. Smiling still felt strange after years of not doing it, but it was getting easier. "He already is a hero. He survived. That takes courage too." Police Chief Jensen arrived with a newcomer, a homeless veteran Jensen had found camping near the highway. Daniel recognized the look in the man's eyes immediately. The distance, the guilt, the self-imposed exile from humanity. "Dan," Jensen said, "this is Marcus, Army, Iraq War. I thought maybe you could talk to him." Daniel approached the newcomer slowly, careful not to spook him. Extended his hand. "Welcome. You hungry? We've got food. You need a place to stay? We've got resources. You need someone who understands? That's what we're here for." Marcus stared at Daniel's extended hand for a long moment before hesitantly taking it. His grip was weak, uncertain. "I don't deserve help," he whispered. "Yeah," Daniel said softly. "I thought that too. For 20 years. Cost me everything. But here's the thing, Marcus, whether you deserve it or not isn't the question. The question is whether you're brave enough to accept it, to keep living, to let your story have more chapters. Tears welled in Marcus's eyes. Daniel knew that look too. The look of a man who'd been holding his breath for so long he'd forgotten how to exhale. "Come on," Daniel said, keeping his voice gentle. "Let me get you some coffee. Then we can talk. Or not talk. Whatever you need." As Daniel guided Marcus toward the refreshment table, he caught sight of his reflection in the center's window. 6 months of regular meals had filled out his frame. Physical therapy had restored most of his mobility despite the burn scars. His beard was trimmed now, his hair cut, his clothes clean and appropriate. But the biggest change wasn't visible. It was internal. It was the way he could look at himself without immediate self-loathing. The way he could remember his 47 fallen soldiers and feel sorrow rather than drown in guilt. The way he could wake up each morning and feel grateful for the chance to help others rather than punishing himself for being alive. The Medal of Honor sat in a display case on the center's wall now, donated by Daniel, with a plaque beneath it reading, "In memory of all those who paid the ultimate price. In honor of all those who carry the weight of survival. You are not alone." Emma Park and her father visited once a month. Emma would run to Daniel and hug him carefully, mindful of his healing burns, and tell him about school, about her friends, about the future she was planning. Every visit reminded Daniel why he'd chosen to keep living. Tyler Mitchell's family sent cards. Other families whose relatives had been saved by firefighters who cited Daniel's actions as inspiration sent letters. The community that had once ignored him now embraced him, not because he was a decorated war hero, but because he'd shown them that redemption was possible, that broken people could heal, that past failures didn't have to define future actions. As the meeting went down and veterans began to leave, some to jobs, some to families, some to their own continued journeys of healing, Daniel stood at the door and shook every hand, looked into every face, offered what encouragement he could. The last to leave was an older veteran, Vietnam era, who'd been attending for 3 months but never spoke. Today, he paused at the door. "Captain Morrison," the man said quietly, "I lost my whole squad in 68. Thought it was my fault for 47 years. Hearing your story, hearing that you carry 47 too, it helps. Knowing I'm not alone." "Thank you. You're not alone," Daniel said firmly. "You never were. We carry these weights together. And together, they're a little lighter." After everyone had gone, after the center was cleaned and locked up, Daniel walked back to his apartment, a small one-bedroom funded by the Veterans Assistance Program he'd once refused but now helped others navigate. The walk took him past his old corner near Patterson's General Store. He paused there, looking at the spot where he'd spent 6 years punishing himself. The corner looked different now, smaller somehow, less significant. "Hey," a voice called out. Thomas Patterson emerged from his store, waving. "Dan, got a minute?" They'd moved to first names 3 months ago after Patterson had tearfully apologized for every time he'd shouted at Daniel to move along. Daniel had forgiven him immediately. He'd given people far worse reasons to be angry at him than merely existing in their sightline. "What's up, Tom?" Patterson held out a coffee fixed exactly how Daniel liked it, information the store owner had somehow memorized. "Just wanted to say thanks. My nephew, the one I told you about, the Marine with PTSD he called yesterday, said he's coming to one of your meetings. Said maybe it's time to stop hiding." Daniel accepted the coffee, its warmth spreading through his hands. Hands that had once been wrapped in fingerless gloves and dirt, now clean and steady. "That's good. Really good. I'll look forward to meeting him." "Dan," Patterson said seriously, "what you've done, what you've built, that center, those meetings, the veterans you're helping, it matters. You matter. I hope you know that." "I'm starting to," Daniel admitted. "Some days I believe it more than others. But I'm starting to." Patterson nodded and headed back to his store. Daniel continued his walk home, sipping the coffee, watching the sunset paint Millbrook's main street in shades of orange and gold. He thought about the man he'd been 6 months ago. The invisible homeless veteran who'd believed he deserved nothing but suffering and anonymity. The man who'd chosen to disappear rather than face his guilt. He thought about the man he was becoming. The veteran advocate who ran support groups and helped others find their way back from the edge. The man who'd chosen to live despite, or perhaps because of his painful past. Both men were him. Both always would be. The man who'd made an impossible choice that cost 47 lives. And the man who'd made another impossible choice that saved 3. The man who'd carried guilt like a cross for 20 years. and the man who was learning slowly to carry hope instead. In his apartment, Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Jensen. Found 2 more vets living rough, bringing them to Wednesday's meeting. They need what you needed. Someone who understands. Daniel typed back, I'll be there. We'll help them find their way home. Home. The word felt strange and wonderful all at once. For 20 years, Daniel had been homeless even when he had shelter, because he'd exiled himself from humanity, from connection, from the belief that he deserved any kind of home. Now he knew the truth. Home wasn't a place. Home was the courage to keep living. Home was the choice to turn pain into purpose. Home was accepting that you could be both broken and healing, guilty and forgiven, lost and found all at the same time. Daniel Morrison, Captain, Army Rangers, retired, stood at his window and looked out at Millbrook, the town that had once ignored him, the town that now embraced him, the town where he'd finally stopped running from his past and started building a future. 47 ghosts still walked with him. They always would. But now, they walked beside him rather than haunting him. Now they pushed him forward rather than holding him back. Now they reminded him not of his failures, but of his responsibility to live well, to serve others, to make sure their sacrifice meant something beyond his own self-destruction. I'm trying, he whispered to them. Every day, I'm trying. I hope I'm making you proud. In the silence of his small apartment, surrounded by the life he was rebuilding one day at a time, Daniel could almost hear their answer carried on the evening breeze. You already are, Captain. You already are. Daniel Morrison smiled, finished his coffee, and began preparing for tomorrow. There would be more veterans to help, more broken people to remind that broken didn't mean beyond repair, more lives to touch with the simple message that had saved his own. Your worst day doesn't define you. Your choice to keep going does. And every day you choose to keep going is an act of heroism all its own. The story of Daniel Morrison spread far beyond Millbrook, Vermont. News outlets picked it up, the decorated war hero who'd lived on the streets, the man who'd saved children from fire despite believing he had no right to be a hero. Documentary filmmakers came. Book publishers made offers. The Pentagon even reached out, asking if he'd speak to active duty soldiers about moral injury and survivors' guilt. Daniel accepted some opportunities and declined others. He gave talks at military bases about the weight of impossible choices. He testified before Congress about veteran mental health services. He raised money for programs that helped veterans transition back to civilian life. But his real work remained in Millbrook, at the community center that had started with one support group and grown into a full veteran services hub. There, away from cameras and headlines, he sat with men and women who carried their own ghosts. He listened to their stories. He shared his own. He reminded them, over and over, that survival wasn't a crime and guilt wasn't a life sentence. Some people called him a hero. Daniel never fully accepted the title. He saw himself as something simpler and perhaps more important, a survivor who'd chosen to live, and in living, had found purpose. The 47 Marines who died in Operation Silent Shepherd remained in his heart. Their names were etched in his memory, recalled every morning and every night. But now, when he thought of them, he didn't drown in guilt. He floated. On purpose. He honored them by living well, by serving others, by proving that their sacrifice hadn't been wasted on a man who'd throw his own life away. Tyler Mitchell grew up and became a firefighter, inspired by the homeless man who'd pulled him from the flames. Emma Park became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping vulnerable people like the man who'd saved her had once been. And Daniel Morrison, the invisible homeless veteran who'd believed he deserved nothing but suffering, became a beacon for others lost in their own darkness. Not because he'd found all the answers, not because his pain had disappeared, but because he'd made the hardest choice of all, to keep living, to keep trying, to keep believing that redemption was possible, one day at a time. His Medal of Honor remained in its case at the community center. But the real medal, the one that mattered most, wasn't something you could pin to a chest or display behind glass. It was written in the lives he'd touched, in the veterans he'd helped, in the children who'd lived because he'd chosen, in a moment of fire and fear, to act. Some heroes charge into battle with flags flying and trumpets sounding. Others do their heroism quietly, in small rooms with broken people, offering the simple revolutionary message that you can survive your worst day and still have good days ahead. Daniel Morrison had been both kinds of hero, and in learning to accept both parts of himself, the man who'd failed and The man who'd saved he'd discovered the truest heroism of all, the courage to forgive yourself and keep going. The courage to turn your pain into purpose. The courage to believe that no matter how dark your past, your future can still hold light. And that courage, that daily choice to keep living despite everything, was worth more than any medal. It was worth everything.